What if you got a second chance? The opportunity to do it all again. Would you? Should you? If you got it wrong first time, maybe. Hindsight can be a wonderful thing, so they say. But what if you got it right? What if your first attempt was world-beating? Should you go again? Risk a reputation? That's what Gordon Murray has done. This is that second chance. But how to know if it was the right decision? There's really only one way to find out.
This is the McLaren F1 and the GMA T.50 together for the first time.
So take a seat, preferably a middle one, and enjoy.
Can the T.50 really be better than this?
If this film in any way tingles your spine or pops your corn, do please think about joining the Hagerty Drivers Club. You get an award-winning magazine and myriad other benefits. To find out more, just click on the link below. Tucked away in Genesis Business Park on Albert Road in Woking, England, the McLaren F1 was developed by a small team of a dozen people with a budget of just £8 million. Backed by Ron Dennis and Mansour Ojay, people like Barry Lett and Peter Stevens worked with Gordon Murray to craft something extraordinary. The F1 was unveiled in 1992, won Le Mans at the first attempt in 1995, and is indisputably one of the greatest road cars of all time.
30 years since the McLaren F1 came out, this landmark car, and it still feels extraordinary today. The numbers were the things that shocked in the early 90s. The 627 brake horsepower, 479 pounds-foot of torque, the price, over £630,000 for one of these. The weight, just over 1,100 kilos, and of course the performance figures. 0 to 60, 3.2 seconds, and with Andy Wallace at the wheel, over 240 miles an hour, flat out. This shocked the world.
One of the things that surprised and delighted was of course the central seat, usually trimmed in a different colour so that anyone looking in would get the impression of a single-seater.
But it's not just the fact that you're in the centre, that's the obvious thing, and it does take a minute or two just to kind of recalibrate because you're so used to being one side or the other and judging the width of a car like that. It's also the fact you sit so far forwards in this car, right up in the nose. And that's something that's perhaps less obvious, but after a while you realise it's, as much as the central driving position, really something quite unlike other cars. Today, of course, it remains a car right up there in the pantheon of greats. And that's reflected in its price, of course. One of these is worth, well, somewhere around 25 million today. I am unashamedly a bit of an F1 fanboy. I adore this car. So I'm so intrigued to see how they follow it.
And perhaps the biggest conundrum of all is how do you conceive of something better than the F1's engine? Murray initially went to Honda for the McLaren's power plant, but ended up at BMW M, where a team led by Paul Rosche designed this dry-sumped, all-aluminium, naturally aspirated 60-degree V12 masterpiece, displacing 6.1 litres with individual throttle bodies, a compression ratio of 11:1, and capable of producing the most wonderful sound.
It's just incredible. Arguably the greatest road car engine ever produced. This engine really does dominate the car. Even Murray himself said that the engine was really 60% of the experience in the F1. So responsive, so torquey. The beauty of this engine is that it's so flexible. You can enjoy it at all speeds. You short shift, drop the revs down, fourth gear, bills, gargles. The gear shift takes a bit of getting used to. Across the gate it's quite narrow, and this whole car actually is sort of a bit like me. It's not great at waking up, so you need warmth in it. But then, it is just sensational. The sound of that roof-mounted intake gulping in air. It's a masterpiece. How do you follow this?
Well, Cosworth thinks it has the answer.
What have you done, Cosworth? I never thought this would happen. I never thought I would be on a test where the F1's engine wasn't the wildest. But this is wilder. It's extraordinary.
This is still a naturally aspirated, dry-sumped aluminium alloy V12, just like the S72 and the F1, but this is significantly smaller in displacement at just 3.9 litres. It has 4 throttle bodies, a higher compression ratio of 14:1, is slightly more widely splayed at 65 degrees, and most crucially of all, at a mere 178 kilos with the 48-volt integrated starter generator, it is just 2/3 of the weight of the F1's engine.
When you first get into this, you think that you might never get used to it. The performance feels even greater than the F1's. It really does. I know Gordon hasn't given any numbers for acceleration, but in gear this must be. It has this odd sort of whine, almost like an electric car at low speeds. And then as soon as you crack the throttle, wow! I mean, the numbers! I was actually a bit worried for this engine against the F1's because the displacement is less by quite a bit. Brake horsepower, 661 brake horsepower, so you know, a bit over 30 brake horsepower more, not a lot. And torque, there's a sort of nice symmetry because the F1 has 479 pounds-foot of torque. This has 479 Newton meters, but that's only 353 pounds-feet of torque. Yet, this engine is every bit as potent and extraordinary, but it feels like in a totally different way. Where the F1 has a beautiful bark, this is a wild, scintillating shriek.
Where the F1's engine revs to 7.5, this only hits a hard limiter at 12,400 RPM. It's an engine that really takes some getting used to. It revs so quickly, over 50,000 RPM per second, that initially it's hard to imagine how you'll ever have a right foot sensitive enough to heel and toe. As such, there are 2 throttle maps, GT, which softens the initial response, and then when you're comfortable you can progress to Sport, which is linear. Tucked away in the menus there is also a rev match function, which is actually very helpful when you first drive the T.50.
Now that might seem like cheating, but trust me, when you first get into this, it blows your mind. The response, I mean, never has a single central rev counter dominating your view of the dash been more important than in this? That's only 8,000 RPM. You could drive around like that and still have one of the most extraordinary engines ever, but there's still another third of the revs to go. Having a titanium throttle seems entirely appropriate, because the last thing you want is any sense of weight under your right foot when the engine is this responsive. But as you get dialed into this, and it takes a while, so you just start driving it harder and harder.
And once you're in the zone and hardwired into its behaviour, you always want to be in sport with the rev matching turned off, so that you have the full immersive analogue experience with you, the driver, conducting the revs.
The way it just picks up, it's like a proper motorsport engine. The amazing thing as well is that, given all the fireworks at the top end, it's still actually very tractable low down. That's 5th gear, posturing along. We've got the GT gearing in this, so 6th makes everything that much quieter. There's a significant drop from 5th to 6th.
The bespoke 6-speed box from X-Track is also available with a shorter 6th ratio, but the taller overdrive top makes more sense to me if you want to use this on any sort of longer journey. Just like the F1, there is also a little switch that you need to flick down to unlock reverse. It's a delightful, tactile prelude.
The gear shift in this is more positive. There's not the slickness of perhaps what you might consider the very best, but the positivity and the confidence that this gives you. When you're driving quickly, you know exactly where the gears are, and it's so quick. Lovely feel as it goes in. Absolutely mechanical. Where the F1, you kind of always hesitate, second to third. This, no doubts at all.
At slower shift speeds, it's not as fluidly slick as something like a Cayman, but the greater resistance makes total sense when you're asking more of it, punching and pulling shifts as fast as you can.
A full bore up change in this. It's a devilish sit of heaven.
Wow. I can't quite believe we've got these two cars together. They just look amazing as a pairing. Clear family resemblance between the two, despite the different badges on the noses. This is PS4, the kind of hero pre-production prototype car. And that is chassis 46, which I drove 10 years ago.
You can see the greater sophistication in the T50's surfaces. It also has a thinner spine than the F1 and more sculptural sides, both things that Murray specifically wanted to change from the F1. Size-wise, the T50 is still impressively compact, just 30mm wider and only 65mm longer, with an almost identical wheelbase to the F1. Stand back, and I still prefer the way the older car looks overall. However, get up close and there is no denying that the engineering artistry runs deeper in the T50. The F1 has standout moments that still wow today, things like the gold in the engine bay and its beautiful pedals. But I feel like every component in the T50, exposed or hidden, has been penned, machined and finished with an obsessive eye on a sort of very pure aesthetic, a simple beauty that shows off the technical. Let's talk practicality. You see, strange though it may seem, the F1 was designed as a usable supercar, and customers proved that it could be used even every day. Murray wanted the T.50 to be the same, but with a few changes, some of which were asked for by those customers. Things like the luggage compartments that top load, rather than the more awkward helicopter side storage of the F1. On the smaller end of the scale, there is the switchgear that is now much easier to grip and twist. Obviously, there is CarPlay and Android Auto this time around, but the stereo has also been uprated to a 700-watt 10-speaker system from Arcam that weighs, of course, much less, just 3.9 kilos or half that of the F1's Kenwood system.
Aircon was another thing that Gordon really wanted to improve for the T.50. So we've got a couple of openings on the car, one which you probably noticed, this one under here underneath their headlights to let the air into the cabin, and another one which you might think was just sort of, well, a poor panel gap, to be honest, if you didn't know what it was for, up here on the roof, which lets the air out of the cabin, again, in an area of low pressure. Other things, fuel tank. Not something most people would think about, but owners, well, when it was a bag tank in the F1 and needed changing pretty frequently, and that was an engine out job, not so good. In this, when you look underneath, just a nice couple of little straps on a nice metal tank.
The tyres on the F1 were a bit of a pain too, being bespoke and therefore a bit of a pain to get hold of, so the T.50 has off-the-shelf Michelin Pilot Sport 4S's. However, perhaps the biggest practical update that I really care about on the T.50 are the headlights. The main beams actually still need some work to throw the light slightly wider on narrow roads, but they are brighter than a fictional love child of Miss Marple and Sherlock Holmes. And there's a bit of extra light at the rear too, when you get the cats nice and hot. After the McLaren F1, I think it's fair to say that there was something of a difficult second album syndrome with the Mercedes-McLaren SLR. Then, in 2004, Gordon Murray left and set up Gordon Murray Design. We had the T25 and T27 city car concepts, but they were the three-seaters that the world needed, not the ones we really wanted. There were other things too, like the Ox truck, the iStream production method. He was involved with Yamaha and TVR, but somehow, certainly from the outside, it felt like the F1's shadow still loomed large over all these projects. Cars like the Bugatti Veyron had obviously subsequently gone faster, and many were quicker, while being even more usable. But in Murray's eyes, those cars all made sacrifices in the shape of forced induction or paddle shifts or all-wheel drive. Nothing had done the pure, analogue, manual, lightweight, rear-wheel drive, naturally aspirated formula better than the F1. And if you think nobody's done it better, then there's less imperative to improve it yourself. Not that the F1 is absolutely perfect. It does have areas where a school report would read, could do better.
One of those, fairly obviously, was the brakes. Because, well, they do squeak for a start. There is a reason for it. Originally this was meant to have carbon-on-carbon brakes. That's what they tried to do, but they just couldn't get them working. The technology wasn't there at the time to make them really operable for a road car. They were too recalcitrant when cold. But the trouble was, given this car's extraordinary top speed, the steels, they're fine, but the pad material had to be so hard to cope with the repeated stops that legislation required. Hence the squeaks. Apparently customers were actually offered a set of softer pads if they wanted, but none of them took up the offer. All obviously wanted to have the reassurance at high speed. Then there's the handling. This, I have to say, is probably one of, if not the best F1s I've driven. It feels really, really good in the corners, really nicely supported. There's not quite as much dive under braking and then squat under acceleration and roll in the corners. Famously no rear anti-roll bar, so you can just feel it sit down at the rear, but this is nicely supported.
I've actually always rather liked the soft suspension, tall sidewalls and managing those weight transfers, because it feels a bit like driving a rally car with a gravel setup on tarmac. But I completely understand why some don't love it.
Driving on a road like this, a spectacular road like this, up through hairpins, you notice the effort you're having to put in, back into first gear, weighty steering. It can be fun out of hairpins actually. It's surprisingly, well, fun to slide at those sort of lower speed levels. But as you get faster, you just really want to be aware of not asking too much of the car in terms of doing several things at once. Keep your input simple. Ask it really one thing at a time. Through quicker direction changes, you just want to be careful. Get your braking done in a relatively straight line, because that engine, you really notice it in such a lightweight car. It can get unruly. It's obviously engaging. There's no ABS, no power assistance to the steering. A truly analog experience. But it does mean that you drive it with a certain amount of prudence. Up onto the top here. What a piece of road we have. No one around at all.
But there were plenty of people around Murray over the years asking for a new F1. And eventually those requests became deafening, and so he thought, why not? The timing seemed right. The money was there, and a car market in love with resto mods and limited run exclusive hypercars seemed ready. So in 2018, that's what he and a new team, and it's important to remember that like the F1, there is very much a team behind this, set about doing. And the T.50 is the result. The initial similarities with the F1 are uncanny. It's like a son or daughter exhibiting the traits of a parent in their features and unconscious mannerisms. Yet, this next generation also has its own character. It instantly feels a bit more hardcore, it's louder inside, the seat seems a little less padded, the primary ride is still pliant, but there's a greater sense of connection to the road underneath you. It feels lighter too. I love the glass panels in the upper sections of the dihedral doors that give a wonderful sense of airiness. Below 10 miles an hour, the steering has power assistance to make manoeuvring easier, but as soon as the speed increases, the assistance clicks off and reveals a wonderful feel.
By any other stretch, this is a car that feels, well, pretty hefty in its steering, weighty, detailed obviously in its feedback, but it requires some effort. But after the F1, this is a step lighter. And this is steering that weights up the way you want it to. So around the straight ahead, there's not that much effort required, but just as you add the lock, that's where you feel the weight come in, as you'd want. The next thing you notice is the braking. So much stronger. There's less dive, and the aero helps with that as well. Keeps the car flat into corners, which again might be disconcerting, but doesn't seem to be, just means it feels stable.
The brakes are Brembo CCMR items with extra machining on the calipers to save a bit more weight, obviously. I think the pedal could perhaps be a touch firmer at the top of its travel, but otherwise they are phenomenal. Unlike the F1, there is the reassurance of ABS too. Can you feel that huge fan working? You can definitely hear it, and it's cited as the reason for the rear being so planted under heavy braking, which it certainly is. Also helping with stability, if you want, is ESP.
And it's really nice, like the rev matching. When you first get into this car, it's so nice just to have something to lean on. You can see it flashing down there in your peripheral vision if you look for it, but you don't really feel it. It's very, very well judged. And then you press this down here and you get ESC Sport to start with. And that gives you just a little bit of leeway. Again, nicely judged, so you lean into it. It doesn't just cut everything down. So you can build up your pace in this car. And whereas in the F1 you want to be careful, this is a car that you can grab by the scruff of the neck and really drive. The transitions, no longer does it feel like you've got a huge weight behind you. There's still that slight softness, a bit of roll in the nose to get used to, a distinctive feeling, but now you're not afraid of it. And you can use the throttle, you trust that rear end. No longer is it a case of the engine being the masterpiece that sort of must be revered and enjoyed in a straight line. The whole package comes together and thrills you.
It has a predictable progressive Salisbury mechanical limited slip diff, and the T.50 actually has narrower section rear tyres than the F1, both things which I think help to make it feel really drivable. Like the F1, there is double wishbone suspension all round. It has rising rate pushrod operation of the steel springs and aluminium R53 passive dampers. There is an anti-roll bar at the front, but just like the F1, no anti-roll bar at the rear.
It feels faithful. You can drive it over the limit. And it feels beautifully benign. I did not expect this. I wondered if this car might be clinical somehow. But it's not. It's just an absolutely joyous driving experience. If you like driving, really driving, that's it.
All that effort with titanium and 3D printing and paring back to get the centre of mass lower and the overall weight down to a dry figure of 997 kilos, over 140 kilos lighter than the already feathery F1, it all feels worth it.
This feels lightweight in a way that the McLaren F1 doesn't. Well, that feels meaty. This feels live. It feels to me like this is the car that makes the most of the Gordon Murray lightweight philosophy. This is kind of lighter than my Clio 182, but with that V12.
There are things that are not perfect about the T.50. I found the screens instead of mirrors a little odd. It's still a faff to get in and out of that central seat. Stall it at the traffic lights and you will have every horn blaring behind you by the time you've waited 3.5 long seconds for it to restart. But you know that everything in this car has been done with an eye on the end goal of saving weight and making it better to drive when you're going for it. And I would forgive pretty much anything and sacrifice every practicality imaginable for that experience.
This is absolutely one of the best driving experiences of my life. Possibly the best. Oh, I know it's expensive. Oh, I'm so sorry that more people can't experience it. The hairs on the back of my neck have been made to stand up in the past, but never quite like this. I never want to stop driving this. I don't want to give it back.
Having these two cars together really does feel like a dream. Each has its own character, exemplified by their different V12 voices. The F1 is arguably the more rounded, usable supercar, With its better NVH, you could truly drive one every day. It also set iconic benchmarks in a way that the T.50 doesn't. It is still the fastest naturally aspirated production road car. Make no mistake, its legendary status is undimmed. Its successor isn't the fastest, or the quickest, or even, despite its £3 million price tag, the most expensive. Such is the mad world we live in. But given a great piece of road, and the choice of the keys to either F1 or T.50, there is no doubt which I would choose. Purely as an analogue driving machine, as an exemplar of lightweight married to a crazily addictive engine, the T.50 is even better than the F1. The McLaren F1 was never meant to be about the numbers, but it sort of became about them. The T.50 definitely isn't about the numbers. It's all about the sensations and those emotions when you drive it. And that's why I wish I could take you all away from your screens just for a moment and put you in that central driving seat to feel what has been created. To put you, in a way, into the mind of its creator, the second chance taker.